This conference will now be recorded.
I'll quickly rush through the slides. It will be only a revision for you. And this is mostly a clinical topic. Though sometimes supports the uterus and learn and asked in the theory, but still it's largely a clinical examination topic, right? So prolapse of the uterus. So we'll just go through in under these headings. Introduction, definition, causes, types of the prolapse or classification of prolapse, degrees, signs and symptoms, diagnosis, differential diagnosis, investigations and management, right? So prolapse of the uterus is one of the commonest conditions which we see day-to-day life. Though nowadays the incidence is decreasing because of more number of cesareans, limiting the family size of the family, more of cesareans. We are not seeing nowadays so much of prolapse cases, right? So mostly seen in multiparous women, right? And something like a herniation, just like you have in your femoral hernia, umbilical hernia, incisional hernia. Like that, this is also a herniation of the uterus through the into the introitus or outside through the introitus, right? It can occur at any age group, even in the reproductive age group or in the younger age group. But most commonly, it is seen in postmenopausal women with a history of previous vaginal deliveries, right? So the recent years, we find that the incidence of prolapse is greatly reduced because of cesarean sections, and we are not doing any difficult vaginal deliveries nowadays. Okay, these are the two most important, and limiting the size of the family. Most of them have now one or two children at the most. We don't have grand multi-gravid nowadays. So that's the reason why the incidence is coming down. But we are having more number of cases following hysterectomy. Wall prolapse following a hysterectomy. So what do you mean by prolapse of the uterus? It is descent of the uterus from its original position in the pelvis. What is the original position of the uterus? Hello. What do you mean by normal position of the uterus in the pelvis? Yes, anybody? Please unmute your audios, all of you. Right? Can you hear me? Hello. What is the normal position of the uterus in the pelvis?
Anteversion, anteflexion.
That is normal position. Position is anteverted, anteversion. When it is descending down, what do you mean? Normal position. So normally the external, this is a vertical descent, right? So normally the external law should be at the level of the ischial spines. Okay? All of you heard? So the level of the external law should be at the level of the ischial spines. When it is below the level of the ischial spine, then you say there is uterine prolapse, uterine descent is there. Right? It's not necessary that all cases the mass should be there outside the introitus or at the introitus. Even if it is within the introitus, but if the level of the external loss is below the ischial spines, then you call it as a prolapse of the uterus. So obviously it will be a first degree prolapse because it is not coming out. All followed all of you? Hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So the external loss should be at the level of the ischial spines. If it descends below, you call it as descent of the uterus or prolapse of the uterus, right? So that's how you define the first degree prolapse. Because it's very easy to diagnose the second, third, and fourth degrees because it will be at the level of the introitus, outside the introitus, procedentia, and so on. So the first degree is when the external loss is below the level of the ischial spine, but it is still within the vagina. Okay. Okay. It is also known as a other names which are given to this condition. Synonyms are the pelvic organ prolapse or the genital prolapse. Right. So when does this sort of a descent of the prolapse occurs? When the supports are weakened. What are the supports? Pelvic floor muscles and the ligaments. Ligaments are nothing but the condensation of the endopelvic fascia. Right? When they are stretched and they are weakened, there is inadequate support to the uterus. So obviously, when the supports are weakened, the uterus, the cervix will descend down. Right? That is the main cause for prolapse of the uterus. So weakening of the pelvic floor muscles will lead to uterine prolapse, which can be caused by why the muscles are becoming weakened, either because of the damage to the supports, either to the muscles or to the facial tissues during pregnancy and childbirth. That is the most important cause for a prolapse to occur. Damage to the supports of the uterus. Then effects of the gravity and the loss of estrogen support with the menopausal state. So though the woman has delivered 20 years back or 30 years back, she will manifest prolapse only after she has attained menopause because of loss of estrogen support to the muscles. So the muscles will become atonic, the supports are weakened, and so there will be descent of the uterus. Right? One is a birth trauma, other one is estrogen withdrawal will cause lack of support to the tone of the muscles. So before we actually go into the prolapse, these are the supports of the uterus. So broadly, they are classified into muscular supports and ligamentary supports. So muscular supports, all of you know, is the levator ani, that is the pelvic diaphragm. Okay. So levator ani is again composed of three types, three divisions depending upon where it is originating. That is iliococcygeus, ischiooccygeus, and pubococcygeus muscles. Right? Okay. Okay. Okay, so all of you know these are the ones which dividing the urogenital diaphragm. So this is the urethra, this is the vaginal introitus, and this is the anal orifice. Right? Okay. So this is the so you have three divisions of the levator ani. Both levator ani put together, you call it as the pelvic diaphragm. So you have pubococcygeus, which arises from the pubic bone, and then it goes around the vagina and then again around the anus. This is known as the puborectalis, and this part is known as the pubovaginalis. Actually, so these puborectalis muscles which are depositing behind the rectum, these are the most important fibers which maintain the which prevent the rectocele prolapse. That is the prolapse of the lower part of the posterior vaginal wall and cause the rectocele. So pubococcygeus muscle is actually condensing around the introitus, around the vagina and the urethra, forming the pubourethralis and pubovaginalis, and around the anus to form the puborectalis muscles. And these fibers which are depositing behind the rectum, these are the of special importance because these are the ones which are giving support to the anus and the rectum, right? So this is the pubococcygeus and this is the iliococcygeus, which will go from the ilium, it comes to the coccyx, right? And you also have an ischiooccygeus, which starts from the ischial tuberosities and then gets inserted into the coccyx, right? You look at the arrangement of these fibers, they are fan-shaped structures. So the direction of these muscle fibers are always medial. Can you see? They are always going medially to get inserted into the coccyx, right? So this is the reason for the internal rotation at the level of the ischial spines. So whenever the muscle is contracting and recoiling, it causes the head of the baby to rotate internally because of the direction of muscle fibers which are facing medially. So the head becomes more and more coming forwards till it impinges underneath the symphysis pubis. So the direction of the muscle fibers, the elastic recoil of the muscle fibers, levator ani or the pelvic diaphragm, that is the cause for the internal rotation of the fetal head during a normal delivery, right? So pubococcyges, ileococcyges, ischio-coccyges forming the levator ani, both together they form the pelvic diaphragm or the levator plate. It is also called a levator plate, right? These are the muscular supports. And then you also have the superficial muscles. So these are the transverse perineal muscles, right? You have two sets of transverse perineal muscles, superficial perineal muscle and a deep transverse perineal muscle underneath it. Okay. And then we also have an ischiocavernosus muscle. So this is lateral one is an ischiocavernosus muscle from the ischial tuberosities. It gets inserted into the clitoris. So on either side you have a ischiocavernosus muscle, and this is called the sphincter vagina, that is controlling the vaginal introitus, which is referred to as a bulbospongiosis or ischiospongiosis. Right? This is known as the sphincter vagina, though it doesn't have much sphincteric action when compared to the external ureteral sphincter and the external anal sphincter. So the muscle fibers which are immediately surrounding the anal orifice are known as the external anal sphincter. You'll have an internal anal sphincter inside. So all these muscles are condensing in between the levator ani, okay, the bulbospongiosis. So this is also the same diagram, more clearly depicting. So this is the ischiocavernosus muscle. This is the bulbocavernosus muscle. So they all deposit in between the vaginal introitus and the anal orifices, which is known as the perineum. And the central deposition is known as the central body of the perineum or the perineal body, which is formed by the deposition of all these paired muscles. That is bulbospongiosis for two pairs of superficial and deep transverse perineal muscles, right? Then this puborectalis muscles, which are forming a sling around the rectum. Then the sphincter ani. Okay, so all these muscles deposit in between the vaginal introitus and the anal orifice, and that forms the central point of perineum or the perineal body. So when there are tears, okay, whenever the patient delivers normally, and that is vaginally, you find that there may be tears, first degree, second degree, third degree, fourth degree, and so on. You have so many perineal tears. So all these perineal tears will cause lack of support to the uterus, cervix, and the vagina, and then it followed by the muscular atony when the woman attains menopause, and then the problem of descent will start. Followed says these are the superficial muscles. So this is the urogenital diaphragm, that is the superficial layer and the deep layer. Okay. So the primary supports of the muscles are the muscular support, that is mainly the pelvic diaphragm, that means both paired levator ani muscles, which contains of three sets, that is pubococcyges, ileococcyges, ischio-coccyges. Then the perineal body, I have already told you, deposition of all these muscles. Then the urogenital diaphragm. Then visceral support is, you know, that the uterus is anteriorly it is supported by the bladder, and posteriorly it is supported by the rectum and the anal canal, right? Then fibromuscular supports. These are the nothing but the condensation of the endopelvic fascia. So these are known as the transverse cervical ligaments. That is, they are also called the McEnroth's ligament. So they are attached to the supravaginal portion of the cervix and to the upper part of the vagina, and then they go transversely to the lateral pelvic wall. So this is a fan-shaped muscles going transversely from the cervix and upper part of the vagina to the pelvic wall on either side. So these are called the transverse cervical ligaments or the McEnroth's ligaments. Okay, and then you have another pair of ligaments which are going back from the same place, that is from the upper part of the vagina and the supravaginal portion of the cervix. They are going back to be inserted into the sacrum. They are called the uterosacral ligaments. So you have a fan-shaped muscles which are going transversely. Those are called the McEnroth's ligaments or the transverse cervical ligaments. Then you have another paired condensation of the ligament, endopelvic fascia of the ligament, that is the uterosacral ligaments, going from the same place back posteriorly, and anteriorly we have a pubocervical ligaments. We are going from the same place to be inserted into the pubis. So these are the three types of muscles Out of this, the most important ligaments are the transverse cervical ligaments and the uterosacral ligaments. Followed, these two are the most important ligaments which are supporting the cervix and upper part of the vagina. Followed, all of you? So when you are asked to write about the supports of the uterus, you have to classify them into muscular supports and ligamental supports. Okay, muscular supports are the pelvic diaphragm and the perineal body and the urogenital diaphragm. So of course, urogenital diaphragm doesn't contain any muscle except other than the deep transverse perineal muscle, but still it offers some support to the descent of the vagina. And then visceral support, in the sense anteriorly it is bounded by the uterus, posteriorly by the rectum and the anal canal. Then the ligamentary supports, most important are the fan-shaped McEnroth's ligament, which is going laterally to the pelvic wall from the cervix and the upper part of the vagina, and posteriorly are the uterosacral ligaments, which are going to the sacrum from the same place, and anteriorly are the pubocervical ligaments. So though round ligaments, in some of the books they have given round ligaments, but round ligaments do not play any role in supporting the uterus. The only function of the round ligament is to maintain the anteversion. Followed, all of you? So only these two ligaments are very important, that is transverse McEnroth's ligament and uterosacral ligaments, and to some extent the pubocervical ligaments. But round ligaments, the broad ligaments, all those, they do not have any role in the support of the uterus. Round ligaments only maintain anteversion. Broad ligaments are only for the passage of the blood vessels, lymphatics, ureter, uterine artery, and so on. They are thin folds of peritoneum. So don't write broad ligament, don't write round ligaments as the support of the uterus. Followed? Though some of the textbooks are giving it. You write only about the pelvic floor, then the perineal body, urogenital diaphragm, then the ligamentary supports, McEnroth's, uterosacrals, and to some extent the pubocervical ligaments. Right? So these two are the main supports. That is, transversely you have the cardinal ligament or the transverse cervical ligament or the McEnroth's ligament, and posteriorly you have the uterosacral ligaments, which are supporting the lower part of the cervix and the upper part of the vagina, right? So this is the normal support. So when the supports are stretched, as during pregnancy, or when the support are weakened because of the loss of estrogen support, then what happened? They are all stretched and they become weakened. Then you find that the uterus starts, because of the increased, the abdominal pressure is directed towards it, and then the uterus and cervix will start coming down. Can you see? This is the normal level, right? And the external loss should be at the level of the ischial spines, whereas now it has come down. It is almost at the level of the introitus. Can you see? All of you? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, good. So now this is the most commonly approved levels of support, that is Delancey's 3 levels of pelvic support, right? So level 1 is the cardinal uterosacral ligament complex. The same thing which I have already told you. They are just described by Delancey as 3 levels of pelvic support. So cardinal uterosacral ligament complex it is called. That is, transversely you have the cardinal ligament, posteriorly you have the uterosacral ligament. So that forms the support for the lower part of the cervix and the vagina to the bony sacrum and to the lateral pelvic wall. That's okay. So uterine prolapse will occur when the cardinal uterosacral ligament complex is attenuated, weakened, and stretched out. Right? That is level 1 support. Then level 2 support is the fascia, arcus tendinous fascia of the pelvis, or the fascia which is overlying the levator ani muscles. So they actually mingle with the vagina. They are called the paracarpus. So they go into the vaginal wall and offer it support. So literally they are binding the vagina to the pelvic wall, right? So arcus tendinous fascia of the pelvis, which is arising from the white line of the fascia. We have white line of fascia from which the obturator muscle is arising. From the same place, this fascia also arises, and it inserts actually into the vaginal part, forming the paracarpus tissue. That is the level 2. So that provide support to the middle part of the vagina. So the upper part of the vagina and the lower part of the cervix are supported by the cardinal uterosacral ligament complex, whereas the middle part of the vagina is supported by the arcus tendinous fascia, that is the paracarpus tissue. Then level 3 is the urogenital diaphragm and the perineal body, which supports this lower part of the vagina. Are you clear now? So the cervix and upper part are by the uterosacral cardinal ligament complex. The middle part of the cervix is by the arcus tendinous fascia, which actually fuses with that of the wall of the vagina, and then provides support to the middle part. Whereas the level 3 is the lower part of the vagina, which is supported by the perineal body and the urogenital diaphragm. Right? So here you can see this is the cervix. This is the cervix. So you can see this is the cardinal ligament and fan-shaped ligament, that is the cardinal ligament. Okay, and that one is the uterosacral ligament posteriorly. Okay, so this is the middle part of the tissue where I have already told you the fascia which is covering the arcus tendinous fascia actually merges with the wall of the fascia. That's how the middle part of the vagina is supported. Right? Followed all of you? Whereas
Yes,
the
ma'am.
lower part of the fascia is supported by this central tendinous body, central tendon of the perineum or the perineal body, as well as the urogenital diaphragm. Followed? So these are the levels of the supports, level 1, level 2, and the level 3 supports. Followed? Yeah. So De Lancey's vaginal supports, I have already told you this. Level 1 is proximal upper one, that is by the uterosacral cardinal ligament complex. So if it is weakened, what will be the defect? It will cause the descent of the cervix. So you get a uterovaginal prolapse, or if the patient has already undergone hysterectomy, it will cause a wall prolapse, and sometimes it may cause even an enterocele, right? Whereas the mid-vaginal prolapse, that is by the arcus tendinous fascia or the arcus tendinous covering the levator ani muscles, so that is the middle vaginal wall support. So if that is defective, it will cause anterior and posterior wall defects. That is, anteriorly it will cause cystocele and the urothrocele. Posteriorly it will cause enterocele and the rectocele and deficient perineum and stress urinary incontinence. Whereas distal vagina, distal 1/3 of the vagina is mainly supported by the pubococcygeal fascia and the rectovaginal septum fusion to the perineal body and the urogenital diaphragm. So when there is defect in this distal vaginal support, it causes lax perineum. So there will be a widening of the introitus, right? The patient may have a rectocele and she may have even anal incontinence. So these are the three De Lancey vaginal support, level 1, 2, 3. And what are the defects causing these? The weakening causes all these defects, right? The etiology of prolapse, why does this prolapse occur? So we have a number of predisposing factors as well as aggravating factors. So what are the predisposing factors? They can be acquired or they can be congenital, right? Acquired causes, most important is the childbirth, right? Childbirth is the most important predisposing factor for prolapse by causing overstretching of all the ligaments, overstretching of the muscular support, then premature bearing down before. So mismanagement of labor, in fact. So when you ask a woman to bear down before full cervical dilatation, that is in the first stage still if you ask the woman to bear down, then there will be weakening of the fascia, there will be stretching of the ligaments, stretching of the muscular supports, and later on they may go into permanent defects and then produce a prolapse when the woman becomes menopausal and the support is lost. Okay, so bearing down before a full cervical dilatation, and we put a forceps and ventose and put unnecessary excessive traction. Okay, so that's the reason why all these forceps and ventose deliveries, assisted vaginal deliveries, have been reduced. In the same way, breech extraction before full cervical dilatation. So all these will cause so much of trauma to the supports of the uterus, and they may cause weakening of the supports. Then prolonged second stage of labor. So all these are in the first stage of labor, right? Then second stage of labor, prolonged second stage of labor, then leading to overstretching of the perineum, then delivery of the large babies. Okay, so birth injury is the single predominant predisposing causes. So a perineal tear is less harmful than excessive stretching of the floor muscles. So if you don't give an episiotomy, or even if it tears naturally, it will be repaired, and that is a better perineum or a better support rather than an unrecognized stretching of the pelvic floor muscles and pelvic floor the uterine ligaments, which occurs during childbirth, because stretching will cause atonicity. Whereas if the muscle is torn, we can nicely suture it, and then the tone can be regained. So always don't hesitate to give episiotomy whenever you find that there is a rigid perineum, or it is a large baby, or the patient is not cooperating, elderly, gravida, obesity, rigid perineum, large babies. So, so give an episiotomy. Or even if there is a spontaneous case, supposing the patient has delivered even before you started attending on her, and it has led to first degree or second degree perineal tear, it is okay if you have sutured it well. But if the patient delivers with excessive stretching of all the supports of the muscle, those are unrecognized injuries to the pelvic, to the uterine supports, and those are the ones which will cause weakening of the supports and later on the prolapse of the uterus. So a perineal tear, spontaneous perineal tear, or a neatly done an episiotomy are less harmful when compared to unrecognized injuries to the pelvic supports, muscles and ligaments, right? And sometimes there may be a peripheral nerve injury, such as a pudendal nerve injury during childbirth. It may cause prolapse, which is reversible in 60% of the cases. And that may be responsible even for stress urinary incontinence in the later weeks of the delivery. Then patient doing hard physical work after delivery without any rest. So because that's what the puerperium is for. Puerperium, the patient is should take rest. That doesn't mean she should be in the bed. She can be ambulant, but she should avoid strenuous work. Before all the muscles, all the ligament, they are regaining their atony. Whatever tone has been lost during childbirth, they have been stretched. Everything has been stretched during vaginal delivery. They have to come back to normal. They have to regain their atony. That may take up to 6 weeks. So you should advise the patient not to do any strenuous heavy work. That doesn't mean she should be bedridden. She can be ambulant, but don't allow her to do any strenuous work, lifting heavy weights and so on. And you can always advise her to do the pelvic floor exercises, that is tightening the pelvic floor muscles. So when she is passing urine, if she wants to suddenly stop in between, what she does, contracting the muscles, stopping the midstream of the urine, that is what she is supposed to do at least 10 times in one sitting. Like that, she can do as many sittings as she can. Even when she is sitting, she is doing some work. Any time she can do, at least she has to do 10 times a day, given stretch, and hold the muscles at least for 45 seconds to 1 minute. Okay. Then address to these problems of postpartum cough, anemia, and so on. And then most important is advise them contraception, rapid succession of the pregnancies. So before the muscles can regain their tone, again she becomes pregnant. The child is hardly 3 months old and she becomes pregnant again. So rapid succession of pregnancies before all the muscles and ligaments have retained their tone. That is also a major predisposing cause for prolapse of the uterus. Right? Then congenital is very, very rare. This is a congenital weakness of supporting tissue, which is referred to as a nulliparous prolapse. So whenever you have a nulliparous lady coming with a prolapse, you have to think of a congenital weakness, because she has not delivered vaginally. There is no reason for the supports to be weakened. So probably there is a congenital weakness, maybe genetic familial inheritance, or sometimes there may be collagen disorders like Ehlers-Danlos disorders, which is collagen deficiency states. So that is known as a nulliparous prolapse, which is seen in childless women. So those are all the predisposing factor, most important being the childbirth, right? Congenital, very rare because of familial congenital weakness to the connective tissues, or a connective tissue disorders like Ehlers-Danlos disorder. Sometimes, rarely, it may be even associated with a spina bifida and other neuromuscular weaknesses also. So all these patients, you have to look for any spina bifida in these individuals and the family history of such prolapses. So those are the predisposing factors. Then what are the aggravating factors? Most important aggravating factor is after attaining menopause. That's the reason why you see all these women are mostly postmenopausal women. So though the injury has occurred 20 years to 2 decades back, the manifestations will be there now because of all these years she could maintain the normal support of the uterus, but now she has lost that hormonal support, that is estrogen support, and there is atrophy of the genital tract, and even the support to the hormonal support to the pelvic floor muscles and ligaments is lost. So there will be prolapse now at this age. Then increased intra-abdominal pressure may be because of chronic cough, COPDs, chronic constipations, abdominal tumors, ascites, and so on. So whenever there's an increased abdominal pressure, there's a transmission down, and then huge ovarian tumors and so on. Then obesity or extreme weakness may also cause prolapse. And fibroid uterus, ovarian tumors, pelvic tumors, they can cause. So these are the aggravating factors. So whenever you are asked to write about etiology, you have to stress more on the birth injury, right? And then congenital weakness and aggravating factors, mostly menopause and increased abdominal pressure. So these are the main causes for prolapse: menopause, multiparity, aging. Then previous hysterectomy is also a risk factor. The woman who has undergone a previous hysterectomy, or whatever may be the reason for hysterectomy, she is more prone for vault prolapse or a cystocele or an enterocele. Obesity, genetic factors, then collagen weakness in the form of a collagen disorders, right? So these are some of the risk factors for pelvic organ prolapse. Ethnicity or race supposed to be more common in Hispanic and whites. So general risk factors are like advancing age, multiparity, then obesity, connective tissue disorders, then genetics, family history of prolapse, increased abdominal pressure like chronic cough, constipation, heavy weightlifting. Then most important is obstetric, operative vaginal delivery or difficult vaginal deliveries. Then previous surgeries like hysterectomy or previous prolapse surgery. Patient would have undergone surgery for prolapse and again it recurs in the form of wall prolapse or an enterocele. The most common being a forgotten enterocele which was not repaired at the time of the first surgery. And types of the prolapse are, how do you classify them? Most important is uterovaginal prolapse. That's the commonest type of prolapse. That is where there is prolapse of the uterus, cervix, and the vagina also, right? Usually accompanied by cystocele and sometimes even by rectocele and androcele. That is the posterior vaginal prolapse. The nulliparous prolapse or the congenital prolapse is something like a herniation. So the whole uterus will come out. You don't find any cystocele, enterocele or anything. The whole uterus comes along with the vagina entirely outside. So this is seen in nulliparous individuals. So it's called a nulliparous prolapse. So congenital weakness at the supports of the uterus. So classification of POP, or it's now called pelvic organ prolapse. So the International Continence Society has renamed the prolapse of the uterus as a pelvic organ prolapse, because it is not just the uterus which is coming out, it also brings the bladder with it, urethra with it, then the rectum with it. So it's called a pelvic organ prolapse. It's the right word to be used, a term to be used. So it can be uterine prolapse, which is a first degree, second degree, third, and procedentia at the fourth degree. Then vaginal prolapse. Vaginal prolapse can be anterior vaginal prolapse or a posterior vaginal prolapse. Okay, anterior vaginal prolapse, upper 2/3 of the anterior vaginal prolapse is called a cystocele. That means the base of the bladder is descending along with the vagina. So when the uterus is coming out, even it brings the anterior vaginal wall along with it. Most commonly, the upper 2/3 of the anterior vaginal wall, which contains the base of the bladder. Then urethrocoele is lower 1/3, which is less common because urethra is well supported by the pubourethral ligament. So usually you don't see urethrocoele that commonly. And cystourethrocoele is where both bladder as well as urethra descent is present. Then posterior vaginal prolapse is again divided into Upper one third is called an enterocoel. Though it is called an enterocoel, usually we don't find any small bowel into it. We only find the redundant peritoneum uh, in the pouch. So upper one third is the enterocoel and lower two thirds is the rectocoel. So sometimes there may be a combined uterovaginal prolapse. It is not just the uterine prolapse. Along with the vaginal prolapse, it will be there. So you call it as uterovaginal prolapse. That is the most common form of prolapse. So there is uterine descent along with a cystocele, rectocele, or an enterocoel. Okay. Then wall prolapse is where, following a hysterectomy, the patient complains with mass per vaginum, and you find that the vaginal vault. So we don't remove vagina, is it not? When you are doing hysterectomy, you remove only uterus along with the cervix and suture the vaginal vault. Now it is called vaginal vault. When you are suturing the opening through which you have taken out the cervix, it's called a vaginal vault. So this vaginal vault can prolapse following a hysterectomy, right? That's called a vault prolapse, which can be again a cystocele or it can be an enterocoel or a rectocele. So these are the prolapse photographs. You can see this is almost only a cystocele. Looks like only a cystocele, which is just at the level of the introitus. That is the second degree prolapse. This is outside. Okay, this is the third degree prolapse, and this is also outside. Okay? Third degree prolapse. So this is the normal position. All of you were telling the position of the uterus. I was asking. So this is normal anteversion of the uterus. Anteversion means where the angle between the vaginal axis and the uterine axis, right? See, this is the normal axis. Okay, this is around 90 degrees. So this is called the anteverted uterus. It is towards the bladder. Okay, this is anteversion. Okay, so this is, instead of being towards the bladder, it is behind. This is called a retroversion, where the long axis of the uterus is directed backwards towards the rectum. So this is a retroversion. So retroversion is not an abnormality. It is only a malposition. That's all. It's not an abnormality. We do find in so many cases a retroverted uterus, right? And this is known as a retroflexion, right? Normally it should be anteflexion, that is angle between the body of the uterus with that of the cervix at the level of the isthmus. Okay, it should be anteverted and anteflexed. Whereas here you find it is retroflexed, right? Can you see the acute angle between the body of the uterus with that of the cervix? This is called a retroflexed uterus. Followed, all of you? Hello? Are you there, all of you? Hello, hello.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you follow? Anteversion, anteflexion, retroversion, retroflexion? All of you? Yes or
Yes,
no?
ma'am. Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am.
Don't answer, how am I to know more? If you don't know, I'll repeat again. I don't mind repeating. The purpose of that class is to make you understand it. Is it not? Otherwise, it will become a monotonous. Okay, so this is, so anteversion and anteflexion is the normal position. But retroversion and retroflexion is malposition. It is not an abnormality, right? Okay. Then we have already said about cystocele. So cystocele, can you see this? This is the uterus. Okay, this is the vagina and this is the bladder. You can see there is a bulge in the upper two thirds of the vaginal wall. Can you see this bulge? Yes. So upper two thirds of the vaginal wall, descent is known as a cystocele. Whereas this is a urethrocele. Can you see this bulge in the urethra? Okay. Lower part of the vaginal wall. This is a urethrocele. So this is the uterus. This is the vagina. This is the cervix. So this is the sacrum and then the rectum and anal canal. This is the bladder. So here you can see a bulge of the bladder into the anterior vaginal wall. So upper two thirds of the anterior vaginal wall bulge is known as the cystocele, whereas lower one third of the vaginal wall bulge is known as the urethrocele, which is uncommon because urethra is well supported. So this is an enterocele. See, you can see the bulge in the upper part of the posterior vaginal wall. Can you see? So this is the vagina. So you can see this bulge. This is an enterocoel. So here is rectocele, that is the prolapse of the lower part of the vaginal wall. Okay. So these are the cystocele, urethrocoele, enterocele, rectocele. So upper 2/3. Okay. Followed or not? Upper 2/3 of the anterior vaginal wall is called cystocele. Upper 1/3 of the lower 1/3 of the anterior vaginal wall is urethrocoele. Okay. Upper 1/3 of the posterior vaginal wall is enterocele. Posterior is always enterocele. Then lower 2/3 of the anterior vaginal wall is a rectocele. Followed all of you? So all of you should know these
Yes,
terms.
ma'am.
What do you rectocele? What do you mean by urethrocoele? What do you mean by entero and rectocele? Okay. So this is the normal anatomy. See, this is the normally antiverted antiflexed uterus. Can you see? So the cervix is it will be at the level of the ischial spines. Okay, well above. This is the normal vagina. This is the bladder, and this is the rectum and the anal canal. You don't find any protrusions anywhere. That is a normal anatomy, right? So here you see that there is a prolapse of the upper part of the anterior vaginal wall. So this is the cystocele. Followed, can you see? This part of the bladder has come down like this. This is a cystocele, upper 2/3 of the anterior vaginal wall. Followed? So this is lower part of the posterior vaginal wall, that is a rectocele. This is coming out. Okay? And when the uterus comes out, you call it as a prolapse of the uterus. Now it is lying just at the level of the introitus. Okay? So cystocele, rectocele, cystocele, urethrocoele anteriorly, posteriorly, enterocele and rectocele. Okay? So how do you classify the degree of uterine descent? This is uterine descent. Okay, when the only cervix is coming down. First degree is where the descent of the cervix is below the level of the ischial spines, but it is still within the vagina. It is above, well above the introitus. Followed all of you. I've already told you the level of the external law should be at the level of the ischial spines. So when the cervix a little bit comes down below the level of the ischial spines, it is still within the vagina. It is above the introitus. It is called the first degree. So second degree is where at the level of the introitus or just above the introitus. Then third degree is where it is below the introitus. You can actually see it when you are doing an inspection of the external genitalia. Where a fourth degree is complete procedentia, where the whole of the uterine fundus, the whole of the cervix and the uterine fundus will be below the level of the introitus. So in third and fourth degrees, you can see the mass coming out. So how will you differentiate between a third degree and a fourth degree prolapse? You have to get above the fundus. Just like in the scrotal swelling, you will be getting above the swelling, is it not? In the same way, you have to hold the mass and try to approximate. If you can feel the fundus, that means it is procedentia. If you cannot feel the fundus of the uterus, that is called getting above the fundus. So patchwork of the mass between your thumb and the finger, both the fingers, and then try to palpate it. So if you can feel the fundus above which you can feel only the cervical walls. You don't feel any tissue in between. That is known as a procedentia. But you can feel the cervix in between the vaginal wall. That means a third degree prolapse. So differentiation between third and second, first and second degree it is very easy. First degree is just into the vagina, just below the ischial spines. Second degree is at or above the vaginal orifice, vaginal introitus. Third and fourth will be outside. So how will you differentiate? Getting above the fundus. So fourth degree is where the whole of the uterus, including the fundus, are outside the introitus. So try to get above the fundus. So of course, by management wise, it doesn't make any difference between third and fourth degree. But examiners usually they do keep asking how do you differentiate, because in both the degrees you find a mass above, below the introitus. So the differentiation is by getting above the fundus, right? So this classification I've already told you. Prolapse of the anterior vaginal wall, upper 2/3 is cystocele, lower 1/3 is erythrocele. Then posterior vaginal wall, upper 1/3 is enterocele and lower 2/3 is rectocele. In some books it is given as middle 1/3 is rectocele and lower 1/3 is deficient perineum. So that is also okay. Then uterine descent, first degree is into the vagina, second degree is up to the level of introitus, third degree is outside the introitus. Procedentia is whole of the uterus is outside the introitus. Okay, you can see the figures, they are very clear. So this is normal. This is a first degree just into the vagina. Second degree is at the level of the introitus. Third degree is outside. Procedentia is where the whole of the fundus will be below the level of the introitus. Okay, so you have to get above the fundus. Then only you will know that it is third or fourth degree, right? So these are some of the pictures of prolapse. Yes, can you see all of you? So this is just a second degree prolapse, which is just at the introitus. Can you see? This is more of a cystocele. So here it is outside. So here it is outside. But how do you know that this is prolapse? How do you know? How can you say it can be also something else? Is it not? How do you know it is prolapse? By the presence of the external loss. Can you see this external loss? Here also you can see the external loss. Yes? All of you?
Yes,
See, you can
ma'am.
see an opening. Yeah, this is the opening external loss. Okay, this is the anterior lip of the cervix, this is the posterior lip of the cervix. So if you ask, how do you know that it is the cervix? You should say, I could visualize the external loss, which is an opening, which is surrounded by anterior lip of the cervix and posterior lip of the cervix. For all other swellings, you will not have this external loss. Followed?
Yes, ma'am.
So degrees of prolapse represent the first degree, second degree, third degree. What are the symptoms of prolapse? So mostly they complain of mass vaginum or something is coming down, or some patients are very, they feel very delicate to say, they may complain of something else. And you start examining the patient, start even inspecting, then you find there's a huge mass. They feel it very delicate to complain. So in early cases, they may complain of low backache because of the stretch over the pelvic muscles. They may complain of pelvic pain and the mass is coming out. If she is in a reproductive age group woman, she may complain of menstrual irregularities, most commonly in the form of an intermenstrual bleeding or post-menstrual bleeding. It's not a regular cycle because of decubitus ulcers or vaginitis, cervicitis, because the mass is outside the vagina, it may get infected and cause vaginitis, cervicitis, okay? Then decubitus ulcerations and all those things. So most commonly it will be a contact bleeding there, right? And very rarely they may even come with postmenopausal bleeding, because we said these women are mostly of postmenopausal period, age group. They mostly come with postmenopausal bleeding. They don't say there is a mass outside. So we think it's a postmenopausal bleeding and we start writing everything in the history. And then when you ask the patient to lie down and then you see, you on inspection, you find a large mass. So the decubitus ulcers which is there will be bleeding, and they complain of postmenopausal bleeding or offensive purulent white discharge, a blood-stained discharge, instead of complaining a mass of vaginum, because it's a very sensitive, delicate issue. So always postmenopausal bleeding you have to keep. Prolapse of the uterus with a decubitus ulcer in mind always till you examine the patient. Then if she's a young patient, she may even complain of dyspareunia. Then the most important are the urinary symptoms. So sometimes they may even complain of difficulty in walking. If it is a huge prolapse which is coming out, procedentia, they may even have difficulty in walking, right? So urinary symptoms are the most important symptoms. Difficulty in passing urine, difficulty in emptying the bladder, incomplete evacuation, frequency, urgency, and dysuria or a painful micturition. So this may suggest incidence of infection. So is the incidence of infection more or less in these cases? Hello. Hello, all of you.
More, ma'am.
Yeah, why? Because of why they are more prone for UTIs, and you should never take them up for surgery unless you are cleared UTI. Because of residual urine. We already said incomplete evacuation. Is it not? So there is more amount of residual urine in these women. They will not be able to empty the bladder completely. So because of the leftover urine, it is more possible that these women may get urinary tract infection, mostly cystitis, but in long-standing cases, it may extend even up to the upper urinary tract. And the classical urinary symptom these patients will tell you, if you ask, they will say that the more they strain, the more difficult will be for emptying the bladder. Because when they are straining more, it is natural, is it not? When one is not able to empty the bladder, they start to strain more, is it not? That's a natural tendency for anybody. Even constipation, they start to strain more. So when they are straining more, what will happen to the mass? Will it become less or will it become more? When she is straining, when she is increasing her abdominal pressure, what will happen to the cystocele? It increases or decreases? Hello,
It
hello.
increases in size.
It increases.
Increases in size.
More she is straining, more bladder will come out. So it becomes more difficult for her to empty the bladder. So this is a classical symptom of acute cystocele. Of course, not in mild cystocele, but if it is huge cystocele, then the more she strains, the more bladder will come out and more difficult the emptying will become. So what she will do after many times training like that and not able to empty, she learns by herself that she has to reduce the mass and then only she can pass the urine. So this is a classical symptom you have to ask for. So the patient gives history that she will reduce the mass before urination, then she will be able to complete the process of micturition. This is very, very important symptom. The more the patient strains, the more difficult will be the act of micturition. She has to reduce the mass for emptying the bladder. The same thing even with the bowel also. If she has got a huge rectocele, the more she strains, the more difficult she will be able to empty the bowel. So that is actually not a constipation, but this is when she is straining more, the whole fecal matter will go into the pouch of the rectocele. Instead of coming out, it goes into that pouch which is bulging into the vagina, right? So this is actually called as a dyschezia, D-Y-S-C-H-A-S-I-A, Dyschezia, dyschezia. It's not constipation, but difficulty in emptying the rectum. Okay, so classically these are the symptoms, but sometimes the patient may even come with a retention of urine. When the whole bladder comes below the level of the internal urethral opening, below the level of the urethral opening, then the patient will have retention of urine or an incarcerated prolapse, irreducible prolapse, and also they may come with retention of urine, but it is very uncommon. Then bowel symptoms are difficulty in defecation. The more she strains, the more difficult they found, but it's called known as dyschezia. So vaginal symptoms, sensation of bulge, protrusion, mass for vaginum, seeing or feeling a bulge when she is straining. Pressure symptoms, heaviness. Urinary symptoms are very, very important classically. Incontinence, that is stress urinary incontinence will be there if she has got a urethrocoele. Then frequency, urgency, a weak stream or a prolonged urinary stream, feeling of incomplete emptying, manual reduction will be needed to start her complete voiding. That is called digitation. So she has to reduce by herself to void the urine. And change of position will be needed to start or complete the voiding. Then bowel symptoms we've already discussed, incontinence of flatus, liquid stools or solid stools. Then feeling of incomplete emptying, straining during defecation. Same way digital evacuation may be needed. Right? We also digitation. Then sometimes they may have sexual symptoms like dyspareunia, painful or difficult intercourse or lack of sensations. Okay? Right? All of you? So examination.
Yes, ma'am.
So you have to do inspection, pelvic examination, vaginal examination, then rectal examination. Hematology is routine complete for the sake of surgery. RFT, LFT, BT, CT, blood group, RH typing, ECG, X-ray chest, and so on. Ultrasound for any head and neck masses are there. X-ray chest, MRI is usually not required. So examination should be done to know the extent of the prolapse to all the compartments of the vagina. Is it anterior, posterior, apical? At rest as well as while straining. Supposing the patient says mass for vagina, but you don't find she's having a mass on examination, ask her to strain, do a Valsalva maneuver, or ask her to walk for some time and come back so that the mass will come out. Then the estrogen status of the tissues, look for the vaginal rugosities. It will be absent if if there is postmenopausal and atrophy. Size of the uterus, mobility, position, neck, and all these things. So retrovaginal prolapse may be visible during inspection. So minor prolapse, it may become visible on straining. So you have to do a rectal examination also to differentiate between a rectocele and an enterocele. So if you do a rectal examination, if the mass touches the tip of your finger, that is, it is above your finger, it is the upper part of the vaginal wall, enterocele, and if it is your finger can be put into the pouch, that means it is a rectocele. So the bulb will appear on your finger, it will be a rectocele. Enterocele will be above your finger. So confirm always rectocele by doing a rectal examination. So this is one of the latest classification which was endorsed by ICS. That is a POPQ system. You need not know about this system in detail, but just remember that there is another type of classification apart from the routine classification of uterine descent and vaginal wall, posterior vaginal wall descent. Okay. So many points are there which are represented in a grid like this. So the upper part is the anterior compartment, middle is the middle one, and lower is the lower compartment. So you take 2 points on the anterior vaginal wall, A point and B point. C is the cervix. If there is no cervix and she has underwent a hysterectomy, it will be a cup. Then middle compartment will be genital hiatus. The length of the genital hiatus, length of the perineal body in all in centimeters. Total vaginal length from the middle part of the grid. The posterior is again A point and posterior wall, B point and posterior wall, and the pouch of Douglas, posterior fornix. So you have a graded scale for this to measure all these measurements, and then you have to plot it like this. And the measurements usually vary from +3 to -3. So all plus is all the plus ones are above the below the introitus, all minus, just like your station. All minus ones are above the introitus, but actually the hymen is taken as a reference point here. Okay. So you just remember that the POPQ system is there, and based upon that we have 5 stages of POPQ classification. Stage 0 is no prolapse. Stage 1 means most distal portion is 1 cm. This is all given in the books. You can read this, but at present we are not doing this POPQ classification. This is mainly revised because of to have some clarity, to have some comparison between the pre-op status and the post-op status, and also between different institutions. So even now we are following still the stage one, the degrees of prolapse, first degree, second degree, third degree, fourth degree, and so on. So strictly speaking, we are supposed to follow a POPQ classification, and then you have to put this grid and compare it after surgery whether we have done a site-specific surgery. So the complications of prolapse are because the vagina is exposed to the exterior, it becomes keratinized. You can see black spots, you can see thickening of the vagina, you can see keratinization, white spots, black spots. The decubitus ulcers are mainly because of interference with because it is hanging outside, there is interference with the vascular supply, the interference with the venous drainage. They are seen mostly on the dependent portion. They are not because of friction. If it is because of friction, it would be on the sides of the walls. Is it not? But this is seen on the most dependent portion. So because of ischemia, and just like your ischemic ulcers, TAO ulcers on the foot, same way here also decubitus ulcers. Hypertrophy of the cervix, then because of the kinking of the ureters, you find there is hydroureter, hydronephrosis, late stages. Long standing prolapse, the patient may have a kinking of the ureters and hydroureters, hydronephrosis, chronic renal failures, then very rarely irreducible or incarcerated. Okay, Ma, thank you so much. for your hearing. Hello, are you there, all of you? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah,